Welcome everyone to season number 3 of the Brain Foods podcast. In this season, we focus on how to engineer the future. And in this episode, I have the great pleasure to introduce you to Eleanor Manley. She's the co-founder of Metta Space, and we chat about the role of data in building inclusive workplaces. Eleanor is not only the co-founder and CTO of Metta Space, but she's been building tech for gender equality for a longer time. In this podcast episode, she tells us about her role as a CTO and her transition to the role of a CSO, and kind of what steps she followed throughout her career to get where she is right now. If you would like to know more about Metta Space, you can visit their website. It's on www.metta-space.com. I also ask you to subscribe to Brain Foods on all major streaming platforms, that is Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify, and share it with a friend who's maybe also in need of an advice on how to engineer their own future. Welcome, Eleanor. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me on, Hannah. I'm very excited to chat.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Eleanor, your background in international relations and your journey into impact tech?
Yeah, definitely. I'm English and French originally. I grew up in France and I always had a passion for politics, specifically international relations. So I jumped straight into a bachelor's of international relations. I went to uni in Madrid at IE. And I think for me, after Brexit and after Cambridge Analytica scandal, I really realized the impact that data has in influencing elections, and the way that we collect data has really fundamentally changed the way our democracy works. And so I rapidly realized that if I wanted to remain in the politics space, that I would actually have to have a broader understanding of how data science actually operates. And so I followed up my bachelor's in international relations with a master's in data science. And I totally fell in love with it. I fell in love with machine learning specifically and natural language processing, which is how a computer understands text. But apart from that, in the meantime, I'd also been working for an impact VC in Madrid, and I'd been introduced to social entrepreneurship. So even though I had no idea that I was going to start my own company, but you can tell in hindsight there were some roots definitely starting to form.
This is a great introduction, I think, especially because a lot of women or also other people approach me and ask, well, I really want to learn coding, Hannah, but how do I get there? And I think you're the perfect example of how it is possible to switch kind of your focus from international relations, or to better say, to combine it with a data focus. So 1 to 2 years on top of, you can just do, for example, a master here as Eleanor did. And there you go, you are a full-fledged, you could call yourself probably a data scientist by now. We're talking today especially about how machine learning can help us build inclusive workspaces. And this is a really important topic. We know that 99% of workplace misconduct goes unreported. This is also a number that comes from Metta Space. And we have $1.4 billion in shareholder value that is lost every year by top companies because of this huge issue. Of course, we also know we live in a time where our generation is asking for way more from their companies. They're asking these questions. How do you treat your employees? What is happening if there is a misconduct? Eleanor, what is the problem that you're really solving with Metta Space?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, as a bit of background, my co-founder Helena and I started this after being witness to a really bad sexual harassment case that affected about half the women around us. And so it came from a very personal problem. And I think, both of us are technical. Helena's background is in cybersecurity. And so for us, the only route to take was, okay, let's do data collection. Let's actually see how big of a problem this actually is. So we started off about 8 months of data collection, and we spoke to hundreds of individuals, hundreds of companies on the basis of, okay, how prolific is sexual harassment? Why is it occurring? To whom? And how is it being resolved? And we uncovered some really unfortunate stats, the ones that you mentioned, but something that really shocked us was how women were more likely to resign than to report a case, meaning that there was just a massive kind of leave of talent from companies, which, you know, many companies at the moment are trying to make their company cultures more diverse. And if you're having workplace misconduct occur, that's just simply not possible. So yeah, for us, the kind of main statistics that we uncovered was obviously that it wasn't just sexual harassment, but it was bullying, discrimination against every type of marginalized groups, as well as fraud and bribery, which obviously your background as well in compliance and fraud is something that would definitely fit here. So the problem is huge, and it affects employees both on a personal level, but also companies on a legal and a financial level. So you have the EU whistleblowing directive, which was put into force in the EU in 2019 and states that all companies have to have whistleblowing systems. But also we know that about 10.5% of all companies are involved with an employee-related court case. And that obviously in the US, it costs them about $500,000 to deal with on average.
This is, I think, a huge cost. I want to just circle back a little bit to a couple of points that you've made here already. I mean, when we talk about misconduct in general, I'm not sure if everyone is aware of like what the whistleblowing directive is and what type of misconduct you can actually report and you have to report. But professional misconduct can take so many different forms, and I think a lot of our listeners might not be aware of that. So I just want to like recap a little bit on what that really means. It can, you know, start with things like confidentiality breaches. It can go into unethical relationships, but also a bit more severe into harassment and discrimination. As we all know, we have like the Title VII of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission that can really get you in big trouble here because there's several laws, I mean, in the EU, but also if we talk about like the US, for example, that protect employees from this hostile conduct based on protected classifications, which may include like race, gender, nationality, age, and disability. I'd be also very curious now, okay, we've gotten an understanding of why it's important and what type of misconducts fall into this space, but what is the role of machine learning in building inclusive workplaces and helping us to prevent and detect and deter this type of behavior?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, as mentioned, you know, Metta Space really operates on three main pillars. So our goal is to help companies prevent, report, and resolve workplace misconduct. So the prevention aspect is really where the machine learning comes in. It's still in stealth mode. It's not currently being used by companies, but it's something that we think is going to become the norm within the next 5 to 10 years within companies. And the goal is early detection of harassment cases. So when we initially developed our product, so we had a reporting and a resolution center, you know, the data that we came across is that it takes someone about 3 months to acknowledge that they're being harassed. And 3 months is a long time. And by the point that they have acknowledged that, they're also quite likely then they're more likely to resign than to report. And so in this case, we wanted to be preventative and actually enable an employee to kind of have a psychological click that occurs far earlier. So yeah, that's one of the main reasons why we started to implement machine learning.
Can you help me understand how machine learning specifically can help all workplaces to detect, deter, and also prevent misconduct in the workplace?
Yeah, definitely. So Metta Space operates under 3 pillars. So we help companies prevent, report, and resolve workplace misconduct. And as we started building out our first tech, so the reporting app and the resolution center for companies, we realized quite rapidly that there was a massive issue when it came to reporting. The reason being is that it takes about 3 months for someone to acknowledge that they've been harassed or to acknowledge any type of workplace misconduct that they're really experiencing. And due to the fact that it takes them 3 months, it means that they're quite far down the pipeline in the kind of journey to leaving a company rather than actually reporting it. And our goal was really to nip misconduct in the bud, to make sure that cases did not actually escalate, that you wanted it to be as simple to resolve and as rapidly resolved as possible. So that's when we came up with the prevention pillar of Metta Space's kind of mission. And the goal here was to detect written harassment in real time that would actually adapt to the individual. So, how this works, it's a natural language processing algorithm. So an algorithm that can understand text, and it detects basically and works as a plugin to workplace communications.
Wow. So can I picture it as an all hearing robot that sits next to me and like overhears all the conversations I'm having with my coworkers?
So it's purely written. So it would work in as a plugin. Think of it kind of as a Grammarly-esque plugin to Google Chrome, or even you can think of it kind of as a Slack bot or Microsoft Teams, but it only detects written harassment. And obviously, a point that's very important here is that you have to confirm, we need the double opt-in, both from a company and an employee, that they want to use this. For us, it's very important that we work within the ethical tech and ethical AI realm. So we definitely don't collect any data that has not been permitted by the user.
I love the double opt-in. I think this gives me also, just as a potential user, a lot of security and just knowledge about like what I'm actually getting. I love what you tell us here about natural language processing, and I just want to ensure that everyone here on this episode is also a bit aware of what it can actually do. Can you just give me a concrete example of how this little bot would basically detect misconduct when I write an email or write a Slack message to anyone in my company?
Yeah, so I can give an example. So for example, if Hannah and I are sending emails to each other, and I send an email to Hannah saying, "Oh, Hannah, I really love how you're dressed today." That's something that is not necessarily explicit. And if we're on friendly terms, Hannah might be, "Oh, thank you so much, Eleanor. That's very kind of you," especially if we're working as friends. However, if we don't have that relationship, that can definitely be seen as inappropriate. So it's able to detect those kind of more gray areas of workplace misconduct, and would ask you, Hannah, if you feel comfortable with the message that I sent. If you say, "Oh, actually, I don't feel comfortable with this message," it will ask you why, and it will ask you if you want to report it or if you want to just save it for later. However, if you do feel comfortable with that message, because we have a correct relationship in the workplace, we certainly don't want to deter positive relationships in the workplace. And so it becomes less likely to detect our future conversations. And it's really about kind of adopting and adapting to every individual's kind of preferences when it comes to language and how we communicate within a company's culture.
I love that it can also learn about relationships that you have over a longer term, whether it be with a colleague. And as you say, if you just make a normal compliment to a colleague you've known for a long time, it will not pick it up versus, of course, maybe a text that you make to a new colleague where it wouldn't be as appropriate. It's also, I think, like can probably guide me towards detecting my own biases much better than I would in the remit of a crazy tech space where you need to write messages very quickly, and you might, find yourself communicating in a way that, could just be perceived by your opponent as maybe somewhat at the edge. So I think it could also be a great tool to just learn what is actually appropriate communication within a workplace. So I really love this explanation that you've just given me. Eleanor, I'm lastly really interested in your recommendations. Now, you've probably been implementing, you've been testing this, you have designed the entire technology around it. What are some of the major concerns that companies have where you want to implement it, and how do you address these?
That's a great question. I think that the major concern is probably around anonymity. So a lot of companies don't feel very comfortable when it comes to anonymous whistleblowing. That's just an unfortunate fact. But we know that people are twice as more likely to report if they have the anonymous option. So it's a really important one when it comes to workplace misconduct. So, our solution for this was, even if someone is anonymous, it's a two-way communication. So we have an integrated messaging system within the reporting app and the resolution center, which is on the company side, to ensure that even if someone is anonymous, they can still communicate with each other. Another stat that we like to share with companies is that 65% of individuals who first submit an anonymous complaint then come forward with their name to help with an investigation. So sometimes it's really just a first step to make someone feel comfortable when submitted a report. But yeah, definitely the integrated messaging system has been really important for our product and is one of the only ones on the market that does that.
Wow, this is really great to learn here also from your experience with companies. I think the last point I would love to touch on is, what would be your recommendations for our listeners that might be interested to found their own company in the impact tech space? What are like 3 to 5 advice or tools that you could give to us to really start and accelerate and succeed with your impact tech startup?
That's a great question. I think that there's quite a few methodologies that I would have loved to have learned earlier on when it came to the basics. It's obvious when you founded a company, but at the beginning it really isn't. So I think in regards to when you're building a product, it's so important to test continuously. So, the mistake that we initially made at Metta Space is we researched. We did 8 months of research to understand the problem. We then designed and then immediately built the product. And we were missing a testing between the design and the build. Luckily for us, we were pretty spot on first time when it came to the reporting app, and we only had to make some minor adjustments from feedback, but that could have gone really horribly wrong. So I would definitely recommend kind of research, design, test that design on what you want your users or who you want your users to be, and then to build. Don't invest in the technology before that. Another recommendation I would give is definitely, ask for help. One of the things that I've definitely come to realize is how willing people are to help you on your journey. And initially, you might not be as straightforward as asking, hey, can you help me with this? And that's something that I've definitely learned to be more forward with. This is both in regards to sales, in regards to product, but also in regards to investment. There's really no point beating around the bush when it comes to asking an investor to fund you. It should very much be an open and direct conversation which honors kind of transparency above else. And I think explaining the situation you're in, why you want that funds, why you think this investor is the best one for you, is definitely a skill that I've learned, through the journey that I wish that I'd learned a lot earlier on.
And I think these are great recommendations. So I just want to recap here that it's really important to know your design thinking principles, and the testing part is really important. Also, the asking for help is not a shame, I think. And I often find myself falling very short of that. So I think it's a great call out to everyone to just go out, be courageous, and do ask for help. It can be as small as asking people to test your products. I get these requests at the moment all the time that people reach out to me and ask if I can test their products, and it can be as small as like little podcast editing tools to some more advanced algorithms. So it's some really interesting stuff out there. Eleanor, it's such a pleasure to have had a chat today with you. I really thank you for the conversation. Despite me here sitting in really, well, I would say a bit hicky South Africa, where the electricity is falling short, there's no more light here. So you will see that this recording also looks a bit different than the others.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on board, Hannah. I really love this conversation, and yeah, definitely the best way to contact me is probably through LinkedIn. I'm at Eleanor Manley, and obviously, if you want to speak about Metta Space, please have a look at our website. We would love to have a chat.